This is my evaluation for our Angry Young Men project. I'm going to talk about dancing, singing, costume, characterisation, set design, props, lines, and the group. I'm going to start with dancing. Okay, during the dance, I had to retie my hair several times because of the movement would make my hair bubble come out. And the stamina was an issue. I got a stitch at one point, and Tammy wasn't. Me and Tammy aren't very good dancers, so it probably would have made more sense to put Tammy with somebody who was good at dancing and put me with somebody who was good at dancing. But the steps were repetitive enough that I managed to do okay. But Tammy got out of time a bit, so that could have been different. The pitch of the song didn't suit my voice, and I couldn't find the right pitch because everybody was singing at the same time and I couldn't even hear myself properly. I think if I'd been doing it on my own, I would have been able to do it in a much better job of it. And projection was an issue. I think that was partly, in my case, it was the pitch. But a lot of people had problems with confidence, and I didn't know the lyrics very well either. Stamina was an issue with the singing as well, because we were all out of breath from the dancing, and the dancing made me quite thirsty as well. Set design and props. The table dominated the birthday party scene, and it gave the impression of space, which contrasted with some of the other scenes, like Look Back in Anger, which was much more claustrophobic and cluttered and confined, even though it was the same amount of room that we were working with. I think the vase on the table, it gave character to the space, but in retrospect it obscured the view of the actors. In the footage of the performance that Thomas shot in front when we were performing in front of the class, you can't see Julie's face very much at all. So I think that should have been placed somewhere else. I think particularly for Meg, the small diverse props that we used were really important for creating a sense of purpose and busyness. They allowed Julia to improvise and give the impression that she actually was expecting people and that she actually was getting ready for people to come to the boarding house. Having things to lean against, like the chair and the white block, really helped with my characterisation. It gave me something to lean against. It made me appear more masculine and more confident. And I don't think it would have been as interesting if I just stood in the same place for the whole time. The toast and the milk were quite high maintenance props, and they were the props that I was responsible for, because we had to get different toast and different milk every day, and we had to have 4 pieces of toast, so that was 2 packets from the canteen, and 1 or 2 small pints of milk. But the canteen wasn't always reliable in sourcing them, so it was really difficult you couldn't rely on them, and they sometimes sold out, so I had to get my dad and my aunt to drop milk off sometimes. Me and Casey didn't have an armchair for our scene, so I just paced instead of sitting in an armchair. Costume. I struggled with tying a tie, so I had to get Tammy to help me. I got Thomas Browning to help me. I got Thomas Taylor to help me at different points because I can't tie a tie. The blazer restricted the movement of my arms. I wore black leggings and a tank top underneath my costume to facilitate easy changing, and for an extra layer of modesty as well, because my nipples kept coming out of my bra. I wore men's shoes, which I think made a big difference to the shoes that I was wearing. I had to keep retucking my shirt because it would come out of my trousers. I know I deliberately didn't wear any jewellery in case I forgot to remove it for the performances, or in case I removed it and then lost it, so I just left it at home. I thought my costume did a good job of portraying my character. It was businesslike and smart and masculine, and I picked it out myself from the costume room. Characterisation. It was really difficult to do a Jewish accent, so in the end I didn't bother. There was a scene with me and Julia where my character had to flirt with her character, and there was some physical contact that we improvised. And I think we did that really well. We did a really good job of responding to each other and not shutting each other down during the improvisations. Kelly gave me a note during one of the scratch performances that we did, that during the bit where I'm supposed to be reminiscing, a monologue where I'm supposed to be reminiscing to Mr. McCann about my weekends with Uncle Barney, that I should look more wistful and more nostalgic and actually visualise it in my head and try and act that out. So I tried to keep that on board. Thomas Taylor and Lachlan tried to coach me in masculine expression. We had about 20 minutes where they were teaching me how to walk like a man, how to bend down like a man, how to pick things up like a man, and trying to teach me how to do that, and that was really useful to me. And I spent some time observing how men walk and move normally, just like sitting at different parts in the college and just looking as a form of research. And for my characterisation, mostly I tried to move quite slowly and quite nonchalantly to give an expression of confidence and charisma. And I used quite expansive gestures with my arms at some points, and I generally tried to look ahead, or like look just above the heads of the audience, to give the impression that I was a confident person. So the lines. It was difficult to remember lines under pressure. I learnt my lines quite quickly and quite well early on, but it was difficult to remember them in the moment, because sometimes I would just freeze even if I knew what the lines were. And I remembered all the lines, not just my lines. I remembered Meg's lines and McCann's lines as well. It was also difficult to remember lines when I was multitasking, because I had to pay attention to the blocking, to the pacing, to the characterisation, and as well as being put under pressure from the audience and the people that I was acting with. So that was something that I struggled with. Initially I found it difficult to remember my lines while making eye contact with Casey, because it would just distract me, so I practiced by looking into a mirror, and I got a lot better at that. There were some parts that Julia and Casey weren't confident on, and I think that's because they had a lot more lines to learn than I did, and usually when you learn lines, you learn them chronologically. So I think our scene at the end, it got a bit neglected, so they didn't know those lines as well. But after the second performance, the first performance and the second performance weren't very good, but the third and the fourth and the fifth performance were good. I think the first 2 performances, that's when we learned which bits we were good at and which bits we weren't so good at. So we'd practice our lines after performances and before performances. We'd practice the bits that we weren't good at. And if there were particular lines that Julia struggled on, I would make sure that I learned the cue lines for them and also the lines themselves so that I could prompt her so we wouldn't get stuck. And if there were lines that Casey was paraphrasing or lines that Casey was getting stuck on, I'd learn those lines so that I could carry on. So we got a lot better after the second performance because of that. The pace could have been slower. Julia kept pointing out that we were finishing a lot quicker than everyone else, and kept kept encouraging me to slow the pace because I had a lot of lines in our scene. And I also think I could have just slowed down the pace generally, because I think Mr. Goldberg, being a confident person, would talk quite slowly and quite nonchalantly and take his time. But I got a bit stressed, and I just wanted to get through my lines as quickly as possible. And I didn't always hold the tension for as long as I should have, or hold the pauses for as long as I should have. Projection was an issue for the singing and for the talking, and I don't know how we would have resolved that because everybody was performing their scenes simultaneously, and if we'd all projected at the same time, nobody would have been able to hear anything anyway. I kept getting distracted by Natalia singing, or Thomas and Lachlan shouting, or Charlotte shouting, Amber shouting. It would break my focus in the scene and make it more difficult to concentrate. And there were times when I'd be talking and projecting, and suddenly I'd have to make the volume go way up in the middle of dialogue because otherwise nobody could hear me. And I don't know if the audience could hear me anyway, because I can't really project over somebody who's shouting. I can't go that loud without shouting myself, which wouldn't have worked in my scene. Okay, that's it. Group. I was in a group with Casey, Beth, Julia, Amy and Lucy. Lucy ended up being cut from our group because she wasn't attending. Casey, Beth and Julia were quite difficult to work with because they're quite hedonistic. They spend quite a lot of time having a laugh, joking around, relaxing, not really doing what they're supposed to be doing. They don't have as much of a work ethic as I do, and they aren't always as mature as I am. Sometimes they take jokes a little bit too far, and it gets annoying when I'm trying to work and they're just messing around. So I found that frustrating, and I found that to make things work I had to do a lot of work independently. I wouldn't have learned my blocking or learned my lines or have my costume sourced if I'd been relying on them to do these things for me and to work with me. I felt like most of the time when I worked with them, it was me supporting them in their learning and in their preparations. It wasn't mutual or symbiotic, generally. I found Casey quite overbearing and abrasive at times, and that made me feel less confident. But I resolved it by apologising if I'd offended her, because I didn't really I just wanted it to go back to normal, and wanted her to know that if I'd offended her or made her angry, that was not my intention, but that she could try and be a bit more diplomatic in future. I think that's it. I don't really have... I'm just going to keep talking, and then if there's too much information, I'll just edit it out later. I didn't like... I understand that we had to do a matinee performance and an evening performance, but I really didn't like it. I would much rather have done just an evening performance or just a matinee performance. And I didn't like performing in front of the class either, even though I thought it was helpful, and I'm glad we got a video of it, and everybody else had to do it, and I liked seeing everybody else's work because I didn't know what their stuff was about. Doing 5 performances in 4 days, in 2 days I mean, was a lot of work. What else? I don't know. So I think that's all. Thank you for watching my evaluation.